You're creating problems for others. Leave this plane immediately, or the police officers will forcibly remove you.
Have you ever been in a situation where one single, tiny accident, a mere brush of an elbow, a moment of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, completely turned your world upside down? What if that small mistake wasn't just an accident to someone else, but a weapon they chose to use against you? This is the story of an ordinary woman on an ordinary flight, who found herself in a nightmare she didn't create, accused of a crime she didn't commit, and thrown out for a reason that will shock you. This is a story of a shocking injustice, a hidden camera, a fearless lawyer, and a revenge so sweet and so powerful, it changed everything. Stay until the very end, because the final twist is something you will never see coming. If this story of standing up against injustice resonated with you, then make sure you are part of this community. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss another one of our real-life mystery deep dives. We have so many more incredible stories coming your way. Now, I have a question for you. Where in the world are you watching this from? Let me know. Comment your city name down below. I read every single comment and love seeing how far and wide this community stretches. The plane hummed with the low, monotonous drone of a long-haul flight, a sound so constant it faded into the background of the mind. Outside the small, double-paned window, an endless expanse of midnight blue stretched into infinity, punctuated only by the cold, distant glitter of stars. Inside, the cabin was a landscape of dimmed lights, slumped shoulders, and the soft rustle of restless sleep. In seat 17B, Kemi Adebayo leaned her head against the cool plastic, her eyes closed. She was going home, or it would have been home once, a bittersweet journey for a family funeral. The trip had been sudden, draining her savings for the last-minute ticket, but family was everything. Her dark hair was pulled into a simple ponytail, and she wore comfortable, worn-in jeans and a soft sweater, seeking solace and familiarity amidst her grief. Across the narrow aisle, in 17A, sat Anya Richardson. Every detail about her was sharp, precise, and calculated, from her stark white designer blouse to the way she held her hands, nails perfectly manicured. She radiated an aura of chilly impatience, her lips a thin, disapproving line as she glanced around the cabin with an expression of mild disgust, as if she were surrounded by lesser beings. She had been a problem since the moment she boarded, complaining about the overhead bin space, the temperature, the very air she was breathing. The flight attendant, a young man named Leo, with a tired but professional smile, had already attended to her 3 times, each interaction leaving him looking more drained. The first incident was small, almost trivial. Kemi, shifting in her seat to get more comfortable, had accidentally let her elbow stray slightly over the armrest into the shared space of the aisle. It was a tiny, unconscious movement, born of the cramped conditions everyone endured. Anya's reaction was immediate and venomous. She didn't just move. She recoiled as if touched by something poisonous. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a sharp, icy scalpel cutting through the cabin's hum. "Could you please keep to your own space? Some of us are trying to rest without being mauled." Kemi, startled from her half-sleep, pulled her arm back instantly, murmuring a soft, genuine apology. "I'm so sorry. It was an accident." She offered a small, conciliatory smile, but Anya just turned her head away, a silent dismissal that was more insulting than words. For a while, there was peace. The plane sailed on through the night. Kemi tried to fall back asleep, but the encounter had left a faint, unpleasant buzz under her skin. She focused on the memory of her aunt, the warm laughter that used to fill her kitchen, trying to push the rude woman from her mind. Anya, however, seemed to be simmering. She pressed the call button again. When Leo arrived, she complained about a draft. He checked the air vent above her, showed her how to close it fully, and left with a quiet sigh of relief that was short-lived. The real storm began an hour later. Kemi was reading a book on her phone, the soft glow illuminating her face. She needed to use the restroom. Carefully, so carefully, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, turning to step into the aisle. Her foot, clad in a simple flat shoe, came down, and it touched something. It was the lightest brush against the toe of Anya's pristine, white luxury sneaker, placed slightly into the aisle. There was no force behind it, no stumble, certainly no stomp. It was the most minor of contacts. Anya iroiptit. What is wrong with you? She shrieked, her voice no longer a scalpel, but a shard of broken glass, loud enough to make a dozen drowsy passengers jolt awake. You kicked me. You did that on purpose. Kemi froze, one hand on her headrest for balance, her eyes wide with shock. I'm so sorry, she stammered, the words feeling useless against the woman's fury. I didn't see your foot there. It was an accident, I promise. But Anya was not listening. She was performing for an audience that was now fully attentive. First you invade my space. Now you're assaulting me? I don't have to tolerate this. I don't feel safe. Her words were deliberate, chosen for their weight and power. I need you moved. Now. Leo was there in seconds, his professional mask firmly back in place, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. Ma'am, is everything all right? She assaulted me. Anya pointed a trembling finger at Kemi, her performance worthy of stage. She kicked me, and I believe it was racially motivated. I will not sit here and be victimized for this entire flight. The air left the cabin. The word hung there, toxic and heavy. Kemi felt the blood drain from her face. That's not true, she said, her voice quiet but firm, laced with a disbelief so profound it was almost paralyzing. It was a complete accident. I barely touched her shoe. Other passengers began to murmur. A man in 18C leaned forward. Hey, come on, lady. It was nothing. We all saw it. Let it go. But his voice was drowned out by Anya's escalating demands. I want her removed from this section immediately. I am a paying customer, and I demand to feel safe. Leo tried to calm her, his voice low and placating. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but the flight is full. There are no other seats. Perhaps I can get you a complimentary drink. This only enraged her further. I don't want a drink. I want her away from me. Are you not listening? She is a threat. The situation was spiraling, and the senior flight attendant, a stern-faced woman named Brenda, arrived. She listened to Anya's hysterical, exaggerated account with a grim expression. She then turned to Kemi, who stood silent and shaking in the aisle, a statue of mortified disbelief. Is this true, ma'am? Of course it's not true, Kemi said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength from the sheer absurdity of it all. I got up to use the lavatory. My foot brushed against her shoe. It was the smallest touch. I apologized immediately. Brenda's eyes scanned the nearby passengers. Some looked away, unwilling to get involved. The man in 18C nodded firmly. She's telling the truth. The other one is making a scene over nothing. But corporate policy, fear of a lawsuit, and the intimidating, privileged fury of Anya Richardson began to tilt the scales. Brenda's face became a mask of cold efficiency. The decision was being made not in the aisle of the plane, but in some distant boardroom where liability was all that mattered. Ma'am, Brenda said, turning to Kemi, her tone leaving no room for argument. I need you to come with me, please. The world seemed to slow down for Kemi. The hum of the engine faded into a dull roar in her ears. This couldn't be happening. She was being singled out, punished for a crime she didn't commit, her character assassinated at 30,000 feet in front of a plane full of strangers. Come with you where? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. There are no other seats. Brenda's lips tightened. We will have to ask you to deplane at the next airport. It's a refueling stop. We will rebook you on the next available flight. The injustice of it was a physical blow. Kemi looked at Anya, who had now quieted, a look of smug, vicious satisfaction settling on her sharp features. She had won. She had used the most charged accusation possible as a weapon to get her way, and the system was bending to her will. Tears of frustration and sheer humiliation welled in Kemi's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give this woman the satisfaction. With a dignity that felt like a suit of armor, she nodded slowly. She gathered her small bag from under the seat, her movements stiff and deliberate. As she was led up the aisle, a walk of shame she had done nothing to deserve, she could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on her. Some were sympathetic, some were embarrassed for her, others were just relieved the disruption was over. She did not look back. She couldn't. The doors closed behind her on the jet bridge, sealing her into a cold, sterile terminal in a city that wasn't her destination. The image of Anya's triumphant smirk burned permanently into her memory. It was more than a personal slight. It was a profound lesson in how easily truth could be vanquished by a loud, privileged lie. And in that moment, shivering alone in the empty gate area, a quiet, steely resolve began to form deep within her, a spark in the overwhelming darkness of her humiliation. The game, though she didn't know it yet, had just begun. The terminal was a tomb of silence, a stark contrast to the pressurized cabin she had just been exiled from. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly, pale glow on the empty rows of connected seats. Kimmy stood frozen for a long moment, her small travel bag hanging limply from her hand, the weight of what had just happened finally crashing down upon her. The humiliation was a hot, thick wave, washing over her from head to toe, leaving a cold numbness in its wake. She could still feel every pair of eyes on her, could still hear the shrill, false accusations ringing in her ears. A single, traitorous tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek before she angrily swiped it away. Crying here, alone, would feel like letting that woman win twice. She found a seat in the farthest, darkest corner of the gate area, pulling her knees up to her chest, making herself small. The flight, her original flight, was still at the gate, a hulking metal beast being refueled. Through the large windows, she could see the tiny figures of ground crew moving around it. Was Anya Richardson looking out, savoring her victory? The thought made Kimmy's stomach turn. She had missed her aunt's funeral for this. The grief for her loss and the fury at her own powerlessness twisted together into a painful knot in her chest. She had done everything right. She had been polite. She had apologized for a minor accident. And yet she was the one sitting on a cold plastic chair in the middle of the night, stranded. The injustice of it was a bitter taste in her mouth. Hours dragged by. The world outside the windows remained pitch black. A different airline's staff arrived at the gate, their cheerful chatter feeling like a personal insult. Eventually, a weary-looking agent approached her. "Ms. Adebayo, we've rebooked you on a flight tomorrow afternoon. There's a voucher for a hotel near the airport." His tone was robotic, devoid of any real empathy. It was a script. She was just another logistical problem to be solved. She took the printed itinerary and the voucher without a word, her fingers trembling slightly. The hotel room was generic and smelled of harsh cleaning chemicals. She didn't sleep. She lay on the stiff bed, staring at the textured ceiling, the events of the flight playing on a relentless loop in her mind. The accidental brush of the elbow, the icy complaint, the light touch of her shoe on white leather, the scream, the word, racially motivated. The phrase echoed, each time feeling more like a violation. That woman had taken something deeply serious, a real and painful struggle, and had weaponized it for something as trivial as a few inches of legroom. She had used it like a key to get whatever she wanted, and it had worked perfectly. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the blinds, the numbness began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning, solid anger. It was a clean, sharp feeling, cutting through the fog of her humiliation. This was not just about her anymore. How many others had that woman bullied? How many times had the system just bent to her will because it was easier than fighting? Kimmy sat up. She couldn't just let this go. Going home and trying to forget would mean Anya Richardson had won completely. She reached for her phone, its battery nearly dead. She had to talk to someone. Her first call was to her cousin, Tund, in London. She relayed the story, her voice cracking with emotion. Tund listened, his silence growing heavier with every word. When she finished, he let out a long, low breath. "Kimmy, that's insane. You have to do something. You can't let her get away with that." "I know," Kimmy whispered, the resolve hardening. "But what? Who would believe me? It's my word against hers. Then get more words, Tun said, his lawyerly instincts kicking in. There were other people on that plane. Someone must have seen what really happened. And the airline, they just threw you off? There has to be a record. There might even be video from the cabin. The idea seemed both daunting and empowering. Evidence. Proof. This wasn't just about feeling wronged. It was about documenting a wrong. She spent the next hour on her dying phone, searching for passenger rights organizations, law firms that specialized in airline disputes, anything that could point her in a direction. It felt like grasping at straws in a vast, indifferent ocean. Her flight the next day was uneventful, a hollow victory. The funeral was a somber affair, filled with a grief that was now complicated by this fresh anger. She hugged her family, she cried for her aunt, but a part of her mind was elsewhere, working, planning. Back in her small apartment a week later, the incident felt both distant and painfully immediate. She knew she needed to act before the trail went cold. She started with the airline's formal complaint department. She wrote a detailed, calm, and factual email describing the event, giving the date, flight number, and seat numbers. She stated that she had been wrongfully removed based on a false accusation and requested an investigation and an apology. The response she received a week later was a masterpiece of corporate evasion. It was a form letter expressing regret for her experience and offering her a $500 travel voucher for her inconvenience. They cited passenger and crew safety as their highest priority as the reason for their actions. They had taken the word of another passenger and acted. The message was clear. They were closing the matter. The voucher felt like a slap in the face, a cheap payoff to make her go away. It made the anger burn brighter. It was her aunt's old friend, Mrs. Bello, who unknowingly gave her the key. Over a cup of tea, Kimmy, feeling defeated, told her the story. Mrs. Bello listened, her wise old eyes growing sad. Kimmy, the world is full of such people. They think their money and their white skin is a shield. They use it to push others down. She patted Kimmy's hand. But you're your mother's daughter. You are strong. If you want to fight, you must fight with their weapons. Not anger. Not tears. You need a shark. You need a lawyer who eats companies like that for breakfast. The phrase stuck with her. A shark. She needed a predator, not a well-meaning advocate. Her search parameters changed. She looked for firms known for aggressive, high-stakes litigation, ones that took on corporations and airlines with a reputation for being ruthless. She compiled a list, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. This was real. She was really going to do this. The first 2 calls were discouraging. One firm said her case was too speculative, without clear evidence of monetary damages. Another said it would be a he said, she said scenario that would be difficult to prove. Hope began to dim again. Then, she called the office of Evans & Associates. She spoke to a junior associate first, who listened patiently. She asked Kimmy to hold. A few minutes later, a different voice came on the line. It was deep, calm, and carried an immediate air of authority. Ms. Adebayo, this is Julian Evans. I'd like you to tell me everything that happened. Take your time. Leave nothing out. And so she did. She told him the whole story, from the first icy comment to the final, smug look on Anya Richardson's face as she was led away. She told him about the other passengers, the flight attendants, the cold hotel room, the insulting voucher. She told him about the word, the one Anya had used so carelessly. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Julian Evans finally spoke, his voice now sharpened with a focused intensity. Ms. Adebayo, what was described to you is not customer service. It is a catastrophic failure of procedure and a blatant act of discrimination fueled by a fraudulent claim. They violated their own contract of carriage. They violated basic principles of decency. And they did it because they thought you would be quiet and go away. He paused. We don't let bullies win in my courtroom, and we certainly don't let corporations reward them for it. I want to take your case. I think we have a very strong claim for severe emotional distress, defamation, and negligent investigation. This isn't about a travel voucher. This is about making them understand the cost of what they did. Kimmy felt a surge of something she hadn't felt since before she boarded that cursed flight. hope. It was fierce and terrifying. What would we be asking for? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Julian Evans's reply was simple and direct. We will be asking for a formal, public apology from the airline, a full revocation of any penalty against you, and financial damages. Significant financial damages. $500,000. The number was so large it was abstract, meaningless. It wasn't about the money. It was about the statement. It was about the cost. Okay, Kimmy said, a new strength solidifying in her core. Okay, let's do it. The spark of resolve in that empty terminal had just been fanned into a flame. The fight was on. The wheels of justice, Kimmy quickly learned, did not turn quickly. They ground forward with a slow, inexorable weight, crushing hope and draining bank accounts with equal indifference. The months following her agreement with Julian Evans were a masterclass in patience and quiet anxiety. Her life became a cycle of work, home, and the meticulous preparation of her case. The initial surge of righteous anger that had propelled her into the lawsuit settled into a low, constant hum in the background of her existence, a note of tension that never quite faded. Julian's team was thorough to the point of exhaustion. They compiled every conceivable piece of evidence. Kimmy spent hours on video calls with paralegals, recounting the story over and over again, her words being honed into a perfect, unshakable testimony. She provided them with the timeline of her trip, the receipt for her ticket bought with her meager savings, the hotel voucher that felt like a monument to her shame. They filed formal, forceful requests with the airline for all internal records related to the incident, the crew's mandatory reports, any internal communications, and, most importantly, the passenger manifest. The waiting was the hardest part. The airline's legal team, a formidable group from a shiny, intimidating firm in the city, responded not with engagement, but with obstruction. Every request was met with a delay, a question over jurisdiction, a demand for more specific parameters. They were playing a game of bureaucratic chess, hoping Kimmy would run out of money, time, or spirit. Julian assured her this was standard. They're testing our resolve, he said, his voice always calm on the other end of the phone. They want to see if we're serious. We are. Then, a breakthrough arrived not from a legal document, but from a personal act of courage. It came in the form of an email to the general address on Julian's firm's website, forwarded directly to him. The subject line was simple: Flight 227, I was there. The sender was Mark Rivas, the man who had been seated in 18C. He had seen the news of the lawsuit, which Julian had strategically leaked to a sympathetic journalist in the aviation industry. Mark's email was detailed and angry. He wrote about how the incident had bothered him for months, how he had watched Anya Richardson's performance with disgust, and how he had been ashamed that no one had done more to stop it. He ended his message with a powerful statement. What they did to that young woman was wrong. I will testify to what I saw. She barely touched her shoe. It was nothing. The other woman lied. Julian called Kimmy immediately. We have a witness, he said, and for the first time, she heard a thread of pure, unvarnished triumph in his voice. A credible, independent witness who was there. This changes everything. Mark Rivas was interviewed, his statement recorded and notarized. He was a solid, reliable-looking man, an engineer with no axe to grind. He was a perfect witness. But Julian wasn't done. A witness is good, he told Kimmy during one of their strategy sessions. But to prove defamation and the airline's negligent investigation, we need to prove intent. We need to show that Anya Richardson knew she was lying, that this was a pattern. He paused. We need to look into her. This felt like crossing a line into something darker, more invasive. Kimmy hesitated. Is that legal? It's legal discovery, Julian replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Her character is central to her credibility. If she has a history of making false claims or of confrontational behavior, especially in similar settings, the court needs to know. It proves she knew exactly what she was doing. It proves malice. He hired a private investigator, a discreet woman named Sienna, whose reports were dry, factual, and utterly devastating. Anya Richardson, it turned out, was not a stranger to conflict. Sienna dug through civil court records, spoke to former associates, and pieced together a history of disputes. There was a lawsuit she had filed against a neighbor over a property line that was dismissed as frivolous. There was a complaint she had made against a restaurant manager that resulted in the young server being fired, a story that bore a chilling resemblance to Kemi's own. The server, a Hispanic woman, had spilled a drop of water near Anya's purse, an accident met with a towering rage and a demand for compensation for a ruined bag that was, according to the manager, barely damp. The most critical find, however, was from a year earlier. Anya had been on a train journey. According to the report, she had gotten into an argument with another passenger, a middle-aged black man, over a seat reservation. She had allegedly claimed he was being aggressive and threatening and demanded railway police remove him. The police report, which Sienna had somehow obtained, noted that the man was calm and compliant throughout, while Anya was described as highly agitated and insistent. The matter was dropped, but the pattern was now undeniable. Anya Richardson used accusations of aggression and threats as her personal toolkit to get her way, and she wielded them with particular venom against people of color. Kemi read the report sitting at her small kitchen table, her hands trembling. It wasn't just about her. This woman was a predator. Her behavior was a calculated weapon. The personal insult Kemi had felt transformed into a colder, more focused sense of purpose. This was bigger than one flight. This was about stopping a serial abuser. Armed with this new, powerful ammunition, Julian went back to the airline's lawyers. The tone of the negotiations shifted dramatically. The delays and obstructions ceased. Suddenly, they were available for meetings. They were keen to find a reasonable resolution. Julian played his hand masterfully, revealing just enough about their findings to make the airline's legal team understand the depth of the disaster facing them. A public trial with this kind of evidence would be a public relations nightmare. The headline wrote itself. Airline sides with serial false accuser, ejects innocent passenger. A settlement conference was scheduled. Kemi dressed in a simple, dark blue dress that felt both professional and like a suit of armor. She walked into the sleek, modern conference room at Julian's offices, her heart hammering against her ribs. Across the wide, polished table sat 3 lawyers for the airline, their faces carefully neutral. Julian was a pillar of calm confidence beside her. The lead airline lawyer, a man with a sharp suit and a sharper gaze, began with expressions of regret for her unfortunate experience. He talked about the challenges of customer service and the difficulty of making split-second decisions. It was the same corporate speak, just delivered in person. Julian listened patiently. Then he leaned forward. "This isn't about a difficult decision," he said, his voice quiet but cutting through the room like a blade. "This is about a choice. Your crew chose to believe a demonstrably dishonest passenger over my client. They chose to punish the victim of a fraudulent claim to appease the aggressor. And we can prove with multiple examples that this passenger has a history of making such fraudulent, racially charged claims. Your client's negligent investigation empowered a bigot and deeply traumatized an innocent woman. We are well past discussions of an unfortunate experience. We are here to discuss accountability." He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a number, the number they had discussed, $500,000. The air left the room. The lawyers across the table stared at it, their carefully constructed composure cracking for just a second, revealing the shock underneath. What followed was a long, grueling back and forth. They spoke about liability, about precedents, about the strength of their witness and the weakness of the airline's position. They spoke about the media. They spoke about the court of public opinion. Kemi sat silently, watching, learning how battle was waged in this quiet, carpeted arena. It was not about shouting. It was about the precise, controlled application of pressure. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the lead airline lawyer sat back in his chair. He looked tired. He looked defeated. "We are prepared to offer a settlement," he said, the words seeming to cost him a great effort. "The amount is significant, but it is within our authority to agree to it on one condition." Julian raised an eyebrow. What condition? The settlement includes a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. The terms, the amount, the very existence of this agreement must remain completely confidential. Permanently. Kimmy's eyes flicked to Julian. This was it. This was the price. The money for her silence. The airline was willing to pay to make the problem, and the story, disappear forever. They wanted to sweep Anya Richardson's behavior and their own compliance under a very expensive rug. The room waited for her response. The revenge was within her grasp, but it came with a muzzle. She thought of the other victims, the server, the man on the train. If she stayed silent, Anya would do this again to someone else. The sweet taste of victory suddenly threatened to turn to ash in her mouth. The silence in the plush conference room was absolute, thick enough to feel like a physical presence. All eyes were on Kemi. The airline's lead lawyer had just laid down his one condition: $500,000 in exchange for her eternal silence. It was a king's ransom, a life-changing sum that whispered of security, of a down payment on a house, of freedom from the grinding financial worry that had been her constant companion. It was everything she had ostensibly been fighting for. But the cost was a betrayal of the very principle that had started this fight. They wanted to pay her to look away, to allow Anya Richardson to continue her cruel, calculated games unchecked. Julian Evans, ever the strategist, turned slightly toward her. His expression was neutral, but his eyes held a silent question. He would advise her take it. It was a guaranteed, monumental victory. A trial was always a gamble. But he was leaving the final, terrible decision to her. Kemi looked down at her hands, clenched in her lap. She thought of the hollow, cold feeling in that empty terminal. She thought of the smug triumph on Anya's face. She thought of the Hispanic server who lost her job, the black man confronted by railway police. She saw their faces, a silent chorus of the bullied and the wronged. If she took the money and signed the NDA, she became a part of the machinery that protected people like Anya. Her victory would be private, but Anya's power would remain public, intact, ready to be wielded against the next vulnerable person. She took a slow, deep breath, filling her lungs as if it were her first free breath since the ordeal began. She looked up, meeting the lawyer's expectant gaze directly. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but did not waver. It was firm, clear, and carried a finality that chilled the room. "No," she said. The word hung in the air, simple and devastating. The lawyer blinked, as if he hadn't heard correctly. "I'm sorry. I will not sign your NDA," Kemi said, her voice growing stronger. "The money is not worth my silence. This isn't just about me. This is about a woman who uses lies as a weapon, and your client, who handed her the ammunition. The public has a right to know what she did. The next person she targets has a right to know her history. I will not help you bury this." Julian let out a slow, almost imperceptible sigh. It wasn't a sigh of disappointment, but of profound respect. He turned back to the stunned lawyers, a new, harder edge in his tone. "You are my client. The NDA is off the table. The settlement offer remains, but it will be a public record, and it will include a formal, public apology from your CEO, admitting fault. Those are our terms. Alternatively, we will see you in court next month, and we will subpoena every passenger on that manifest. The choice is yours." The following weeks were a blur of tense, frantic negotiations. The airline, faced with the prospect of a spectacularly public and damaging trial, folded. They agreed to every one of Kemi's demands. The money was transferred. A press release, drafted by Julian and approved by Kemi, was issued by the airline. It was a stunning, unequivocal admission of failure. It apologized directly and humbly to Kemi Adebayo, acknowledging she had been wrongfully removed based on an unsubstantiated claim, and outlined new, stringent policies for handling passenger disputes to prevent such an injustice from ever happening again. The story exploded. News outlets, bloggers, and social media lit up. Kemi's name was everywhere, not as a troublemaker, but as a victor. She was interviewed, her calm dignity and unwavering principles shining through. She never mentioned Anya Richardson by name in her interviews, referring to her only as the other passenger. She didn't need to. The internet, with its relentless efficiency, did the work for her. Someone on the flight, empowered by Kimmy's bravery, came forward anonymously on a forum, naming Anya and describing her horrifying behavior in detail. Then, others found their voice. The Hispanic server reached out to a journalist. The story of her firing was published. The man from the train gave a quiet, powerful interview about the fear and humiliation of being falsely accused. A pattern emerged, a picture of a woman whose privilege was a club she used a bludgeon, though she deemed beneath her. Anya Richardson's name became synonymous with toxic entitlement and racist manipulation. Her professional life, built on a facade of respectability, evaporated. Clients dropped her. Her social circle, the kind that valued appearances above all else, closed ranks and shut her out. She became a pariah, utterly and completely exposed. The revenge was not delivered by Kimmy's hand, but by the cold, brutal court of public opinion, a force far more merciless than any judge or jury. The day the funds cleared her account, Kimmy felt a strange, profound quiet. The fight was over. She had won everything she had set out to win and more. She sat in her apartment, the morning sun streaming through the window, and she allowed herself to feel the full weight of the journey. The fear, the anger, the doubt, it had all been worth it. She thought of her aunt, a woman of immense quiet strength. She hoped she would have been proud. With a portion of the money, she established a small legal defense fund in her aunt's name, dedicated to helping others who face discrimination and lack the resources to fight back. It was the perfect circle, transforming the poison of that experience into a tool for good. One afternoon, a thick, expensive-looking envelope arrived at her door. There was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of high-quality stationery. The handwriting was sharp and angular, slashed across the page in furious ink. "You think you've won. You think you've ruined me. You took everything from me. This isn't over." It was unsigned, but it needed no signature. The venom was a familiar poison. Kimmy's heart hammered for a single, startled second, a primal flash of fear. She stood there, holding the note, the sun warming her back. She looked at the words, at the desperate, unhinged rage they contained. And then a slow, calm smile touched her lips. She walked to the kitchen, struck a match, and held the flame to the corner of the expensive paper. She dropped it into the sink, watching as Anya Richardson's bitter words curled, blackened, and turned to ash. The threat meant nothing. It was the last, pathetic gasp of a bully who had finally been stripped of her power. Kimmy had not just won a settlement. She had won her peace. She had her life back, but was a new life, one forged in the fire of a great injustice and tempered by her own unbreakable will. She turned away from the sink, the last of the smoke dissipating into the air. Outside her window, the world continued, bright and full of possibility. The nightmare was finally completely over. She had not just taken revenge. She had taken back her story, and in doing so, she had ensured that Anya Richardson's would end not with a bang, but with a silent, deserved whisper of oblivion.